I think power corrupts, and wealth can lead to power.
Mm-hmm.
Wealth can corrupt the mind, maybe.
Well, no. So think about it this way. So if you have excess material wealth, and you don't need to work or pursue a mission or something like that, you generally get this sort of case of the mind degrades because it's got nothing to push against. Often, rich people are flying around on first class and eating all the food, and then eating at the the airport, what do you call it, the lounge, and then getting, I just went to a conference right now, which was like one of those fully inclusive conferences. And even me, like someone who considers themselves pretty strict with, the way I eat and all that sort of stuff, I ate like a fucking slob. And everyone, like, there was just overeating, and like, so sort of like restraint goes out the window. So it's like when you have a lot of material comfort, and the evidence is there. It's like, you look at Rome, this is what happened with the Roman senators. They became extremely materially affluent, and it said that when Rome governed by iron, it was strong, but then when it started governing by gold, it became weak. And that's sort of the material wealth piece, is that you end up with such a cushion that you become soft, and it eats you alive. And then someone who is more Spartan in nature, so you look at Attila the Hun, for example, who brought the Romans to their knees. Attila and the Scythians, or the Huns at the time, as I think the Romans called them, the Huns, were, they couldn't be bought off with gold. It wasn't money that they were seeking. Like, Attila specifically wanted to bring down Rome, and, there was a whole story behind, why he wanted to do that. But they were far stronger, far sharper, and, they did what was considered the impossible. It was the same with the Macedonians in the early days. Like, they were a bunch of mountain, basically tribal leaders that came together under Philip, and then after Philip's death, Alexander took over, and then they basically blitzkrieged, the entire Persian Empire, and the Persian Empire at that time was affluent. So they went from Cyrus the Great, who was the guy who unified the Persians and actually defeated the Assyrians, and then I think it was like 200 years later or whatever, 300 years later, so a number of generations, you ended up with Darius, who was the guy running away from Alexander, who had a 40,000 person army against what was said to be 1 million, right? So a lot of that was sort of the kind of people. So the Macedonians came in as missionaries who were there to take the empire, whereas a lot of the people fighting on the Persian side were mercenaries. They were just sort of paid, so they didn't have to be there. So I think there's something about this material wealth thing which ties back into what you were saying before about, do we just end up a bunch of rich turds who only care about status and don't care about anything else? And then
maybe not just status though, Alex. Maybe
comfort, status,
consumption. Like, money. I've been broke and I've had money, never been rich, but like, I've had the freedoms that come with money, that if I want to get on a plane, I can, or I can go and do my shopping, or I can go out to a nice restaurant. Maybe just life gets easier for these people, and that's why I'm saying, we talk about, most Bitcoiners, they talk about come for the gains, stay for the revolution. I like come for the revolution, stay for the gains. Either work, but there is always that kind of idea that your material wealth is going to massively increase. Yeah. And everyone enjoys the price going up, or Bitcoin, right? Mm-hmm. Why?
Well, because it does make things easier. And this is, so this is why I draw from the whole warrior culture thing, is like, in a warrior culture, ease is not valued. Adversity is valued. And you look at, I'll use the samurais as an example. In samurai culture, in the feudal culture in Japan, you sort of had the emperor, then you had the shogun when he existed, then you had the daimyos, who were like kind of like the noble lords that served the shogun. Then you had the samurai, they were the warrior class. Then you had the artisans, you had the peasants, you had the merchants underneath the peasants, and then you had the eta, who were like the ones who were considered the dirty people, so they would deal with the dead and everything like that. But the merchants were sort of despised by the samurai and the upper classes, because the merchants would be those who would be, they would sell, they would sell their word, or they would sell their mother for, wares. Like they were traders, whereas samurai believed in the currency of, reputation, or the currency of honor more than reputation. I think reputation is sort of like a subset of honor, right? And you couldn't buy a samurai off. That was the whole point. It's like they actually had a disdain for this idea of like material wealth. So warrior classes try and value these other things that material wealth cannot buy.
But at a time where material wealth can buy some people and not others, how did they come to be that they, as a group of people, held these virtues?
Well,
and why did they die off why did the warrior class die off?
As a class, yeah. So there's a whole thing here. So first of all, I mean, the feudalism lasted the longest in Japan than anywhere else, right? So sort of feudalism fell apart in the West, right around the French Revolution, probably a little bit earlier in England and things like that. In Japan, it didn't finish up until the late 1800s. And, the sort of the class structure and the hierarchy in Japan, there's still echoes of sort of the feudal nature in Japan. And that's why I think, you get a lot more of this cultural sort of, respect and politeness and that sort of stuff, because a lot of, this sort of this Bushido code in Japan, it impacted the cultural norms in Japan. Now, why did it last so long? So, I mean, I guess it worked in Japan. It really, really worked. There was this particular warrior class that essentially, not really policed, but they were the to be a samurai meant to behave and act in a way that embodied these virtues. It didn't mean that you just had a fucking sword and you could chop someone down. Like there was things that you needed to work on and things that you needed to embody, and those virtues include like courage, honor, compassion, respect, loyalty, and you look at how some of these things manifested. Like if you dishonored yourself as a samurai, for example, they had the. I mean, really, really think about like what that actually means. Is you did the wrong thing, and to claim back your honor, like you would give your life and do it in such a way that it was
fucking painful. Yeah,
and you would disgrace yourself if you showed pain in your face.
Really?
Yeah, that was the whole point. Yeah, exactly. So like
you had to fall on your sword without any expression of pain.
Correct. Without screaming, without any of that sort of stuff.
And were you considered to have saved face in such a scenario? Like, okay, he's
correct, and then that's how you brought your honor back, and your family would be spared from being wiped out or whatever the case was, right? And like that kind, like I mean, it brings some sort of chills down my spine at the moment just thinking about it and talking about it. Is that like that is lost, today, and it was particularly lost as we transitioned from a world that went from the feudal structure into what we sort of have today, is sort of this capitalist, money first, material first sort of world that we live in, and we've thrown away a lot of that. Now, mind you, some of these virtues and values have found their way into the business world. So people who are generally thought of in high regard in the business world, people who, keep their word, for example, who do the right thing, who don't backstab, either their partners or do the wrong thing by their competitors and stuff like that, or who don't rip off their customers, or who don't pour, cheap chemicals and say that it's something else. Like, there is a reputational value. There is a level of honor in some business operations, right? And those people we come to respect naturally, right? Mm-hmm. We come to buy their products more, etc. But there is this sort of mix with people who will forget about that, and they'll try and make money at all costs, and screw the virtues, screw the morality, and whatever. And we see the results of that. One kind of pathway actually makes the world worse. the other pathway, makes the world better. So trying to, we've gone off on 10 tangents.
Well, no, so I want to go back to that samurai thing. What was the role of the samurai in the society? It was an army.
They were the knights, basically. So,
yes. So would you not say that the consistent thing here is that it's to do with armies, whether it's the Marine Corps right now, the samurais, whichever one it is, and there's like an understanding that for an army to be effective, it has to have some form of discipline, and that discipline is based around specific rules, specific virtues, some form of brotherhood. You can talk about the saving the honor of a samurai falling on a sword, but you can also talk about the Marine Corps. We will not leave one man behind.
And death before the sun up, take a bullet.
So is this not really a soldier class that has existed through any form of army, that there needs to be a discipline with an army for an army to be able to fight? Is that not what we're just talking about there? But outside of that, you have a functioning society which has its own culture outside of the army. Like, I'm not going to operate like a Marine Corps soldier. I should, maybe, because I would get in shape, and I'd have better discipline, I'd eat better food, and I'd sleep better. But these are armies.
But see, that's my point there. So my whole thesis is that if we, in civilian culture, adopted some of these virtues, I believe civilian culture would get stronger and not degrade and turn into the weak men bring bad times. And I think that's the thing, is that we think it should just be reserved for the warrior class. And now that we're in a time of peace and we don't need war anymore, and war is bad and all that sort of stuff, we can do away with the whole warrior culture, the warrior ideology. And what do we become? We become fat slobs who don't believe in reputation or morality or honor or any of that sort of stuff. And then the world decays and turns into shit, basically.
We're talking about good parenting as well.
Exactly. I mean, good parenting. Like, you look at the way, a parent should be trying to inculcate better virtues in the children from a young age, and not like do whatever the hell parents are doing today, which is a whole political thing that I probably don't want to get into here. But these are, I mean, you basically answered it, is the highest virtues are found in those environments, the warrior environments, because you are actually at the edge.
Well, it might cost you your life, or it might cost you a comrade's life. It might cost you a war. It might cost you your homeland.
Stakes are as high as they get.
And then when you talk about it does exist within business, it's a similar scenario. I know as an employer, I have to treat my staff well. I have to put their interests first, and they will work hard for the business. I know if I shake a hand on a deal, I should keep my honor.
Correct. Yes.
Otherwise, that person won't do business with me again. But it seems like outside of armies, business, like general civilization, no one gives a fuck, because it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, and that's the sad part, and that's what I'm trying to sort of put forth.
But there are also other screwy incentives.
For example,
well, like the incentives of media to lie and spit out propaganda to sell advertising. That exists, which corrupts us all.
Totally.
Yeah, there's a lot of corrupting influences on our mind.
There is. Yeah, there is. And this is part of, like, if your North Star is to not, like, if your North Star is just to make money, for example, or to increase your material wealth, like if that's your only North Star, if it's just number go up, for example, I think that you end up with a world where, you skew it towards where we are now with like media and all this sort of stuff, right? It's just sell the next thing and, squeeze the maximum amount of juice you can out of everything like that. And it's hard for me to say this because, I'm such a proponent of like, capitalism, Austrian economics and all this sort of stuff. Like I do think economics is at the, praxeology is at the center of all human behavior, right? We need to, that needs to be recognized. But see, that's on the material realm. What I'm sort of grappling with this in this book is like, is there something that is like not on the material realm? So like Stephen Pressfield, who wrote
The War of Art.
The War of Art and a whole bunch of other. My favorite book from him by far is The Virtues of War, which is, it's a fictional book where he writes about basically Alexander the Great's exploits through Persia and everything. It's fucking fantastic. Like when you read that, like, well, I wouldn't even recommend reading it. I'd just recommend just get the Audible and just listen to that. It is you won't be able to put it down. You'll listen to the whole 6.
What is it?
The Virtues of War.
The Virtues of War.
Yeah, and you get a flavor. Like it's obviously it's historic fiction, but it's it's real, but obviously the words and what's being said throughout is different. But there's real anecdotes. Like there's a famous story about Alexander the Great coming back from India with his army, crossing the desert, and he had his lung punctured from an arrow because he was the first one to climb over the fucking wall. And this is the king, right? Like, imagine Joe Biden going and doing this today. It's just not going to happen, right? So he's the first one climbing over the wall, and encouraging his men through his honor, through his courage, and that fires them up to sort of climb and do the same. And his lung gets punctured, and he almost dies. Anyway, he survives that, and then on the way back, like still sick and barely breathing with a punctured lung, through the fucking desert, everyone's dying of starvation. There's no water, they're running out of food and everything. A couple of soldiers find some water somewhere, and they kind of like put it in a helmet, and they carry it back like half a mile or whatever, like through the cavalcade to him, so that he can drink. And they're like guarding it with their swords and everything, and they pass it over to him, and he takes it. He looks at them, looks at the army, he lifts it, and he spills the water out into the desert. And the whole sort of army erupts in like this idea of, if that's the king that's leading us, there's no way we're ever going to lose, because he's willing to face adversity and go through everything that they're going through. So, and that's sort of like real leadership. But that kind of leadership you develop through adversity, through facing that sort of stuff, and through trying to develop and inculcate these sorts of values.